the bush out to get you. And when you go and actually investigate and you find there's nothing in the bush out to get you, rather than assuming that you might have been mistaken, maybe it's a spirit.
Yeah, the social psychologists call that the hyperactive agency detector.
And the fact that we can be, before we had a good understanding, we still don't have a good understanding of death and the mind and stuff. But if I'm standing here.
Does Matt actually think that we have a good understanding of death and the mind? What is he talking about? I mean, one of the hottest topics of debate is consciousness and how materialist reductionist philosophers can't explain and don't know what consciousness is. It's a problem, and they try and and guess what? It's because of their stupid materialist presuppositions that they can't explain consciousness, obviously. Now, questioning that would mean questioning faith in scientism. Now, wait a minute. I thought that, right, what is Matt kind of saying here is that we will eventually have an answer. Don't worry, bro. We'll eventually solve these issues. Remember in the Bertrand Russell video that we watched with Tristan the other day, right? Didn't Bertrand Russell say something like this?
I am convinced that certainly down the road we will have an answer through science for all of our problems.
That's called faith. That's a faith-based worldview. You are deceiving yourself, right? You think that you live in a world of science, facts, and logic. And then when you're presented with problems, inadequacies, contradictions, incoherencies, areas that are unclear, unknown, you give a faith-based answer that one day the halls of science and the lab coat men, the science men, the science girls will solve this problem. That's called faith. That's a faith-based worldview.
Here talking to you, and I drop over dead. There's a clear, undeniable difference in me sitting here as an animated being and me laying there as no longer there. And so it seems a natural inference that something that about me has left. That doesn't mean that there's actually something about me, like a soul or whatever, that's left.
Okay, so thank you, Matt, for admitting that he has no soul. He has no consciousness. There's nothing really that left when he went from a living state to a dead state. And that would mean that ultimately, Matt, you are not a self that is making coherent arguments. And so if you're not a self, you're not a being making coherent arguments, because there's no metaphysics, there's none of that stuff, then you're incoherent. You're admitting that you don't make an argument, that you are not a you. But doesn't Matt Dillahunty want to be paid when he goes on tour? Doesn't he want to be paid if he writes a book, right? This is the same point we made to JF. You don't actually live that way. You say that, right, out of your rhetoric and presentation. But I'm pretty sure that Matt wants to get paid for Matt's work. And so you live and act as if metaphysics is true and you are a self, but you want to go out and convince everybody that there are no selves. Exactly. But now, I guess in this worldview, we don't have to be consistent, right? There's no logical laws. Nothing's actually coherent. So there's nothing wrong with being hypocritical and inconsistent, right? But wait a minute, Matt, I thought we were supposed to obey the laws of logic and consistency. You are trying to call Jordan out and all the theists out, right, for not being consistent. But what is binding us, logically speaking, to actually be consistent? You don't live consistently. You just denied the self, and yet you want to be paid for your speaking tour because you're Matt Dillahunty, a self, right, that has a right to get paid for what he does. You see the games these people play? They're playing games.
We don't tend to think the same thing when the radio stops working or the television stops working. It's not like the man in the TV has left. It's just off.
Let me see a false analogy, right? So the fact that a radio or a TV turns off is no different than a human being dying, right? Totally false analogy because it's based on the presupposition of materialism. Now, Matt has not proven skepticism or empiricism or materialism or reductionism in this debate, right? At no point has he really even offered a counter argument or proof. He's just tried to play the skeptic, right? Like he's going to sit back as this agnostic skeptic who doesn't know anything. I don't know. I don't know that there's any proof of anything. We can't say, it's you arrogant theists who claim to know. I don't know. But this is a mirage. This is a ruse because Matt actually is claiming to know things, making metaphysical claims that he doesn't even realize are exceptionally strong claims.
Exactly in your head either, even though it's localized there.
So why would I think consciousness is anywhere other than my head?
Well, how do you account for consciousness?
Well, I'm not sure that we can account for consciousness.
This is definitely true.
But
yes. See, and that's
I have
another
no reason to think
that's
that it's
another,
beyond what the brain produces.
Exactly right. So the brain produces consciousness. It's essentially identical to the brain. The mind is the brain. The self is the brain, is the gray matter. And so there is no self. Does Matt really believe that he's not a self? Matt seems to think of himself quite highly. It's odd that he would think so highly of something that doesn't exist.
The fact that something's mysterious doesn't mean that, well, if something's mysterious...
Consciousness isn't just mysterious. It's like really mysterious. It's the most mysterious thing.
Okay, well,
right?
the fact that...
It's not like ordinary mysterious.
The fact that something is really mysterious to the point where I think you and I would agree that we don't have an explanation for it. Mm-hmm. Okay, if there was something like that, we'll say that it's maybe consciousness. We agree we don't have an explanation, or at least a complete one for consciousness,
or even a partial one.
Okay, sure.
So, it seems vaguely associated with the brain.
Really mysterious, and you and I have no explanation for it. As human beings, we're uncomfortable with saying "I don't know." This is something I'm trying to teach people to become more comfortable with.
Oh, is that right, Matt? Really? Because the whole skeptical project that appears under the smoke and mirrors of agnosticism and humility, as we saw from our debate, is actually a dogmatic perspective of rigid what can and cannot be and duplicity, right? Because Matt says, don't believe in anything that you can't empirically ground or justify. I asked Matt 3 or 4 basic questions about things that he believes in that are non-empirical, and he could not justify or give an account for them. And in response, he says, it just is. I don't have to give an account for it. It just is. How many times did he say in the debate, it just is? Do you understand that in a debate, that is losing? That is a completely baseless, ad hoc loss. The very thing that you're grounding your position on, you're saying just is. Now, as an opponent in the debate, I can reply by saying, well, God just is. If you can be ad hoc, I can be ad hoc. I'm not making that argument. I'm not saying God just is. I'm illustrating the point. Okay, all the idiot atheists in that debate thought I was saying that God just is. I'm illustrating that you can't make an ad hoc argument, dude. These people are like, atheism is a mental illness. It's like a mental illness. It really is. I mean, they think that theism is a mental illness. No. You guys are the mental ill people because you do the very thing that out of your mouth you say you can't do within like a minute. Don't believe in anything that you can't empirically verify. Matt, can you empirically verify logic? Of course not. Logic is not empirical. Well, thank you. Why do you believe in logic? Because it just is, Jay. Who is dumb enough to believe that that was a good argument and that that was a sufficient reply to my challenge in the debate? I mean, if you believe that, I have no help for you. There's nothing I can say. Like that's should be on the face of it obvious.
Is to say, I don't know. And so when you ask me about...
This is a ruse. They're not saying I don't know. They're not actually being skeptical. Right? Because when I ask them about the things that they use to critique the theists, they're not skeptics about it. They're dogmatists.
Consciousness, my answer is, I don't know. But for other people, they're so uncomfortable.
No, it's not, Matt. That is totally disingenuous. You do not always say, I don't know.
With I don't know, that they posit an explanation that they cannot justify. Something is untestable and unfalsifiable, and that...
You mean the things that I asked you in the debate that are untestable, unfalsifiable, that you can't justify, like the laws of logic, like transcendental categories? All of those things that you said I can't justify, I can't give an account for, they just are. They just are. They just are. You said that 5, 10 times in the debate. That's why you lost the debate. They just are. You said no transcendental category or object can be proven because you thought that a presupposition is just something you can't prove. That's not what a presupposition is.
And that is that there's a ghost in the machine. I can't make that leap because it is entirely speculation without support.
Matt, everything that you acknowledged to believe in is therefore speculation without support on your own grounds.
Seems intuitively right because of how we view the world. And yet, I would rather say, I don't know, and then continue to explore.
But that's not what you did, right? You spent the debate saying no one can know, and therefore God doesn't exist. And logic, I do believe in, it just is, you see. So totally contradictory, totally inconsistent. They're not honest with themselves. But by the way, if you're an atheist, you don't have to be honest, right? You can lie.
For it, because I worry that by asserting what the explanation is, you stop looking for the actual explanation.
Okay, so you made the case that
Yeah, but remember, Matt said that the actual explanation should be anything but theism. So Matt isn't actually neutral, right? And he admitted that if you listened.